Okay, so we are continuing on here. So talking about in the last video, various religious terms, so like the idea of like a religious sect, and branches and denominations and things like that. And we really talked about the beginnings and the origins of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, predominantly focusing on Judaism at the very end. So we're going to pick up now with Christianity, all right, and kind of understand kind of where this came from. All right, so Christianity is the overall largest religion on the planet, having over 2 billion followers worldwide with all of its different denominations. And so, where does that really fall into in terms of this idea of, Christianity and Judaism and Islam? So again, just like with Judaism, like we said in the last video, it follows that line of Abraham, all right, and, follows the Old Testament until you get to this gentleman down here, Jesus Christ. All right, as depicted in Da Vinci's Last Supper. And so Christ is essentially, he's born a Jewish guy, but I mean, debatable if he's really Jewish, in terms of, his actions and things like that. But definitely a very religious and spiritual person. There's no question about that. And then his followers, essentially his, disciples right here, I believe they're all featured, essentially begin the religion after Jesus dies. And Christianity doesn't really become a religion. It breaks off from Judaism as a result of that. And so for the next couple hundred years, Christianity is slowly developing as a result of essentially, the acts of these disciples and their followers and, people like them who believe in, the teachings, spirituals, and the miracles performed in the New Testament, which is kind of written down by these guys in the four Gospels. And so essentially it becomes this kind of really small religion that grows in more and more followers over time. And so, grows as a result of here inside the Roman Empire, and they were persecuted for a very long time until one Roman emperor, Constantine, the night before a battle has a vision that says, if you take on the cross, if you believe in Jesus, you will win this next victory, which he does, and then he promptly converts to Christianity and then allows for the toleration of Christianity before or going forward, and then a couple hundred years later, it becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire. And so for Constantine, that was a big step forward because before then, Christianity was a very persecuted group, much as the Jews were. And so that obviously affects world history for a very large, obvious reason, in the sense that helps to spur on that big part of the religion. All right, as a result, and we'll just kind of skip over this here. If you want to go back and look at the specific notes, you can do that. Essentially, that's where the religious, growth of Christianity begins, following that with that approval, and then will get spread throughout the globe, as we'll kind of, mention a little bit later here. All right, so in terms of the breakdown of Christianity itself, especially within the United States, it follows those large migration patterns. But it's not just about this. This is the actual overall breakdown of the numbers globally. And I also list off where you're most likely to find them here in North America. So as we said in the first video, 51% of all Christians are Catholic. All right, so that means that they follow the Pope. Latin is part of that big piece of that. And so think about the Romance languages. So again, French, Spanish, Latin, Italian, all right, that would make sense based on, where do we find Roman Catholicism here in Europe, Italy, France, Spain. Very, very big in those places, as well as other places up here in Eastern Europe within Poland, Lithuania, a little bit, beyond there as well. And again, that all comes back to essentially missionary work and forced conversions, and well, not necessarily, in some cases, forced conversions. But anyway, so when we also think beyond that, all right, we also think about Latin America. So that would be, essentially anywhere from Mexico on down, through Panama, Cuba, and the Caribbean. You're also thinking about, Argentina and Brazil, but also into the southwestern part of the United States. So we think, Texas on through California, you think Florida, but also into the Northeast with Boston, with Irish immigrants as well, especially because most Irish are Catholic. So any predominant Irish location will predominantly be Catholic. But that's not all. That's not all because of people in Northern Ireland, which again we will talk more about in terms of religious conflict within Ireland itself. But then we also got French-speaking Quebec as well. And the Protestants, that's 24% of them. So again, but this follows, again, with our migration patterns. So inside of Northwest Europe, that's Scandinavia up here, as well as within Germany, and, a different variety within England. There's your Anglican and Protestants right there. And so that's much of the Midwest and the southern United States as seen kind of on this map. Then 11% follow Eastern Orthodox Church, which it got started here in Constantinople, out here in what is now Istanbul. And that is predominantly Eastern and Southern Europe, including Russia. And then the other 16% or so, I think is what it comes out to, follow along with, lines of like, Mormons, and a few other, types of groups. Coptic Christians fall under that as well. Right. So as we said before, spreads predominantly with trade and then with missionaries, people trying to spread their religion, trying to get as many converts as possible for the idea of salvation. But that doesn't mean it doesn't get expanded by other means, such as the expansion and exploration associated with war. So think about when the Spanish are coming over to the Americas. That is very heavily influenced in terms of conversion of the peoples here, and the subsequent slavery that follows into the Americas when they bring over African slaves as well. So that moves along with it, right? But also people will convert as a result of, just being true believers in the faith, but also others will convert to not only Christianity, but also into Buddhism and into a little bit of Hinduism, but predominantly also Islam, because that they see the benefits of trade. They see the benefits of power and connecting to these other powerful and rich, wealthy powers and groups as a result. So more people, at least at the top end, are willing to take it on as a result of that. More of the common folk, based on the actions of missionaries, people that are willing to do and help them out with good deeds and things like that, right? So within the diffusion of Christianity, I guess I had 2 pages of that. Whoops, it wasn't supposed to be there. So flipping on over to Islam. So this kind of comes more into, again, that breakdown. So we go back, when we talked in the previous video about Abraham having 2 sons. His first son is Ishmael, right? And then the other son being Isaac, which follows the Christian and Judaism line. All right, so Ishmael, son of Hagar and Abraham. Okay, in this case, within Islam, Hagar is not considered a slave, but a wife on par and equal to Sarah, and Ishmael is the firstborn son. And as we said in the previous video, that is something that is agreed upon by all the religious groups, is that Ishmael was born first. All right, just the condition of his mother is a different story. Right, and the treatment of Abraham with Ishmael is also very different too. So within Islam itself, there's 1.5 billion followers around the globe, and is getting more converts every year. All right, and the majority of them fit under this term of what we call Sunni and Shia. And where does this breakdown come from? Why are there different groups within Islam? Well, in the sense that we didn't really talk about it here, but we'll mention it very, very briefly. Within Christianity, there's a big difference between Catholics and Protestants over the power of the church, the issues within language. Again, they're not necessarily needed for us to understand, but differences that come up over time. So within Sunni and Shia differences within Islam, okay, so the Prophet Muhammad, is the founder of the Islamic faith, and so he is essentially, he is a merchant, and he hears the voice of God coming through the angel Gabriel, and he gets someone to write down the Quran, kind of his version, the final version of what is supposed to be, the Old and New Testament and the Bible. They were on the right track, but, they were incorrect in their teachings according to Islam. And so that's why Islam has a lot of the same stories and lessons as Christianity and Judaism, but, again, a different take on it and then kind of expanded. And so when Muhammad dies, there is a discussion of, well, he didn't name a successor. Was there supposed to be a successor? Who is going to lead this, group of this new religion? Should there be somebody that leads? And so that's kind of the breakdown within, the two, within the Sunni and the Shia, because for the Sunnis, they believe that there should have been an election to choose the next leader of the Muslim community. And so they follow initially with, 3 people that are elected initially, and I think it's Muhammad's father-in-law, it's what it starts with, and then there's 2 others that follow him afterwards over a short period. And then it goes to his nephew, who, this is where the Shia follow, because they believe that there should be a social hierarchy to this. It should be kind of like a family line, although, again, Muhammad said nothing on the subject of, should there be kind of a hierarchy. And so that leads to conflict between the Sunni and the Shia over that piece, because that's where it leads to conflict and killings between Muslims as a result. And this video kind of explains that a little bit more. And so for the most part, most Sunni and Shia don't actually care too much about that conflict. But when you look at it from a global perspective today, especially where we're going to look at, the majority of where Shia are located, that is Iran, Iraq, and Pakistan. Iran, again, being a very big Shia country, but also within Iraq, that helps to explain a lot of the issues related to The mistreatment within Iraq before the United States goes in 2003, but also within the Islamic State and the Islamic or kind of Iraqi civil war. There is a lot of religious tension as a result brewing over a lot of this. And for the most part, throughout much of history, this kind of thing is not a big issue. It kind of spurs up every couple hundred years. But it only became a real big issue over the last couple decades in the region, right? And Iran being a very the biggest Shia country does not help that situation. And that's why there's a lot of mistrust between the Sunni and the Shia today within the Middle East because of the role that Iran plays, but also the treatment of Shia and Sunnis in Iraq, depending on who is in charge over a given time. So again, something we'll look at further down the road. So the diffusion, starting here in Mecca and Medina, with the city of Mecca, and then really growing in Medina. You can kind of see over the next couple hundred years, there's a big growth within Islam that starts way sooner, or not way sooner, but spreads way quicker than Christianity did. Again, another universalizing faith, trying to convert as many people as possible for the idea of salvation. So Islam spreads through, resulting, just like with what I just said with Christianity, in terms of marriage, trade, conquest is something I've learned with teaching AP World, is that the soldiers, bring the religion with them, but they don't actually force a whole lot of people to convert. It was more, again, by choice for the most part. And then, a lot of people did it to avoid taxes, because there was a tax if you lived in a Muslim community and you weren't Muslim, that, you guys take care of yourselves, but there's a tax to live here if you're not a Muslim. And so many people would convert to try and get away from that. But yeah, and then Arabic is that lingua franca, as that is what the Quran is written in. Right? It's not written in, Farsi, which is spoken in Persia. It's not written in, I'm struggling on other languages. It's not written in Swahili, which is spoken here on the eastern coast of Africa. So Arabic becomes this kind of one language that all Muslims are at least able to know a little bit of. Same thing with Jews and Hebrew, because, again, of that connection to, that's the prayer book. That's what you say. Though it's not the primary language of, even the majority, because the largest speaking Muslim country is not in the Middle East, right? It is Indonesia, and then India and Pakistan. I don't remember which one is the second and third, but yeah. So there you go. And then here's your kind of Muslim world map. So predominantly, again, located here. And even in Indonesia, where they have the most Muslims on the planet, it's still only 85%. So the majority are kind of here in North Africa and in the Middle East, but not, the highest numbers within India and Indonesia, where they have the most people. All right, so here's your Sunni and Shia locations. So again, predominantly Sunni, and then Shia kind of in these other places. Some other things. Most Muslims migrate to North Africa and the Middle East in relation to religion and jobs. Again, the idea of the oil that kind of exists in the Middle East is a big draw. That's kind of why we saw a lot of people moving from India and Pakistan and Bangladesh and Indonesia, moving into Oman and Saudi Arabia, and then also into Europe as like Turkey, from Turkey to Germany, or from Turkey to Germany as guest workers. North Africa to France because there's work, but also there's a connection to being former colonies of the French. Russia itself and then many of its former states, like the countries that are named Stan. So Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan. Like Stan is the name of, like, it's just the Republic of the Islamic Republic of the Turks, the Uzbeks, the Kyrgyz, the Tajiks. Okay, there are Islamic countries of these. Like Pakistan is essentially, an Islamic republic is essentially what Stan means. All right. So yeah. So Europe is only 3% of the entire Muslim population, but it takes in 34% of the Muslim migrants, and again, a lot of that coming in based again on location, connections to colonization, but again, also that plays in with, the Syrian refugee crisis, right? So we're not going to get to the whole thing within these other religions, but one thing that we will mention definitely in class is that Buddhism is a syncretic faith, and as they are in China, that they hold on to a lot of different religious beliefs, and you can be more than one thing, right? So in the next video, we'll start talking about this, how religion shapes the physical landscape. So in these last two videos, we've hopefully talked about migration patterns a little bit, as well as the understanding of these different religions. So yeah, then we'll talk about the whole thing within the religious landscape. So that's where we are. Oh, there you go. One last thing. Christians make up 50% of international migrants, most going to the United States. So we'll finish on that note because I forgot to mention it earlier.